fellow travelers, and welcome to the Versus Stars podcast. How my loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. And remember, click the subscribe button, everybody. It's an amazing episode because aboard the mothership is Edmund Trueman. He's the creator behind the historic graphic novel Postcards from Congo. Come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Trueman. Thank you so much for coming to the Versus Stars podcast.
Oh, wicked! Thanks for having me. I love your intergalactic background. I'm really jealous. It looks so boring just to see the studio.
It's my whole traversing the stars. You're my star that I'm traversing. The whole theme. It's corny, but it works.
My favorite movie when I was young was 2001: A Space Odyssey, and you're really reminding me of that intergalactic space station scene.
That is a great movie. There's not. I always like Hal. Hal was one of the great characters in sci-fi.
Yeah. And one of the most pity you ever feel for a character who has no face. Like he has no physical appearance at all, and you feel so sad for him.
And is murdering people, yet you still do feel kind of bad for him.
Yeah.
But like I said, that's what happens with great characterization. You do connect with the dot on the screen, and and the voice does everything for you.
Yeah, totally. Like the whole appearance of Hal, yeah, he's just that dot in a circle. It's kind of like, the Scott McCloud Understanding Comics. I guess you know it because everyone knows it. And he has that bit about that if you draw a circle and just put a dot in it, anyone will see that and understand that it's a face with an eye.
Yeah.
And I think with Hal, they really just broke it down to like the most simple thing someone would identify with.
I agree completely, and I really do think I don't know the name of the voice actor, but he gave such humanity to that voice that it became real when you heard it.
Yeah, totally.
And it's one of the few times the sequel was great as well. I love 2010 as well. It's one of my favorites.
I've never seen it because I was a really hard Kubrick fan when I was young, and when I found out that the sequel wasn't by Kubrick, I was like, I'm not touching it.
It's a worthy successor. It covers the United States Russia Cold War aspect to the storyline, and you can tell he purposely put in some Kubrick touches just to kind of make the connection there. But I would tell you it redeems Hal quite a bit, so it's worth watching.
Does it explain the Stargate sequence?
It totally does not.
Okay. Good or bad? Because that was always the enigma for me. I got to the end of the film, I was like, that was amazing, but what just happened?
It's sort of like the end of Inception, where it ends in a weird way, but it kind of works because you can never quite solve it.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I'll check it out.
I do recommend it. Like I said, Roy Schneider's in it. Fantastic actor. Great movie. But anyways, so going back to you. So what inspired your love for comics and who were your earliest influences?
What inspired my love for comics? That's a really hard question because I guess I'm reading them since I'm so young. I can't really remember what it was. I love stories. I love storytelling. What made me want to do comics, I think, is because I wanted to tell stories, and I always loved drawing. Drawing was just like always that like go-to way to occupy yourself. You can always find a pen and a paper somewhere, and it's sort of like the ultimate boredom cure. I mean, I think there are many other things like that. Writing as well. You can always just pick up a pen and paper and start writing. And I think as a kid, I just hated being bored. So anytime I was bored, I would just grab a pen and paper and start drawing. So I think comics was like a natural progression from that love of stories and the love of drawing. That I was like, well, this is a way I can tell stories. I don't really need much help from other people, although it's nice to collab, but it's not like a film where you need a big team. What were the earliest artists? Obviously, when I was really young, I was big on superheroes, like a lot of people. I was a huge Spider-Man fiend. And then I think at some point in my early teens, I was like, yo, that stuff's lame, man. I don't need that. I don't know. I considered I don't know why. And I kind of got off it and I never really got back on it again. I really like Kim Deitch. You know Kim Deitch?
I'm actually not familiar.
Okay, he was one of the sort of Robert Crumb original generation of underground comic artists. But and he made some really cool. He's still got that like 60s kind of underground comic style. He made really complex stories in which the narrative has many levels, and like at some point you're watching a film in the comic, but at some point you're in the comic's reality. You never know which one you're in. He wrote a really good comic called Boulevard of Broken Dreams, about the early days of animation. One of the main characters is based on Winsor McCay when he got older and he got disillusioned with what had happened with animation.
Yeah.
That's wicked. And I think I randomly picked up a Kim Deitch book from a bookshelf, and that would have been around the time when graphic novels started appearing in like regular bookshops. I'm from a small town, so there wasn't like a comic shop.
Right.
There would
Right.
be like a newsagent, some big comics, Spider-Man, stuff like that. And then that would have been around the time when graphic novels started arriving in regular bookshops. And I picked up some Kim Deitch, and I was just like, you can just do so much with this format, Like, but I mean, like, superheroes are wicked, and I loved them before. But when I saw something like that, it just totally blew my mind with what you can achieve. And obviously, Hergé's Tintin was a huge influence on me as a kid. I really love those stories. And I think in terms of the way that I draw, that's definitely the style that stuck with me the most. And then as I got older, I got more into like the kind of people who Hergé influenced. Like Yves Chalon was a French guy. He's not really that much translated into English. He did a series called Freddie Lombard that's translated into English, but everything else he did was never translated. Guys like Joost Schwart, that's a Dutch guy, also kind of took that Hergé style, but then in the 70s and 80s, they put like a real alternative spin on it. He did a lot of covers for, well, I don't know if he did a lot. He did some covers for Raw, the Art Spiegelman magazine from the 80s.
Oh, very cool. So you're now both the writer and artist of Postcards from the Congo, which I got to read. It was fantastic. So what inspired the creation of this graphic novel?
What inspired the creation? I guess, like a lot of people, I like writing about stuff that I'm really interested in. Well, the first thing was that my fiction writing's not that good. I'd like to get better at it.
Okay.
I thought, I mean, like sometimes I try and write fiction, but I just thought I think I'm much better at non-fiction, and maybe I should just like stick with the guns and go for that. And I think it's good to write about what you're interested in. And kind of in about the year leading up to COVID, I don't know why, but I just started thinking a lot about how little I knew about African history and what had gone on in Africa, like within my own lifetime and also before that. I had a few friends in Europe who had grown up in Africa, or maybe their parents had, and they were born in Europe. And, we had casual conversations about life experiences. Those who'd fled to Europe, which was some of those people, had lived through some absolutely crazy things. And I was really ashamed that I actually was totally unfamiliar with those series of events, that it happened within my own lifetime and I was absolutely unaware, where I could give you quite an accurate history of what had gone on in Europe and North America within my own lifetime. And it sort of ashamed me. And I talked to a lot of people around me, and I found that most of us, apart from those who were like descended from African people, but the most of the rest of us didn't have that much of an idea of what had been going on. So I just got into I don't know, at first just a really big sort of Wikipedia and YouTube hole, and then it went deeper and deeper. And I got really interested in the story of the Congo. I just think it's a really interesting story, and there's many sides to it. And it's a history that's been really linked with our history in the West, North America, west of Europe, but in ways that we're not generally told about when we talk about our history. There are some really big decisive links there, which don't usually get put on the documentaries or the books that we're reading, definitely not in the schools.
Mm.
And I just found it really interesting. The coronavirus stuff happened. In the beginning, I was really psyched. I wanted to go to Congo and sort of like see what was going on there in the present day, maybe write something about that. Coronavirus happened. Obviously, going anywhere was not. I mean, I'm already quite a bedroom geek, as I guess many comics fans can relate to. But when coronavirus happened, I was like legally enforced to be a bedroom geek. So I thought, I'm just going to write about what I'm already reading a lot about, but try and make like a sort of a beginner's introduction to it. There's loads of stuff out there. You're trying to read about the history of a whole country and the time before it was a country, because it was only those national boundaries were only created in the late 19th century. Before that, it would have been loads of different individual kingdoms and cultures of different people, like most of Africa was before colonization. So there's so much to write about, so much to read about. And I just thought maybe it'd be cool to make a book which looks nice. It's got nice drawings, it's easy to read. And it's like a digestible introduction to the history of Congo.
I think what you mentioned is kind of fascinating because as reading the Congo, your book, Postcards from the Congo, I realized something that you said as well, which is I really know nothing substantial about that area. I mean, talk about I mean, literally not just the Congo, but almost the whole African continent. I mean, Nelson Mandela, a little about South Africa. We've seen some of the movies. Try to remember the one with Nelson Mandela and played by Morgan Freeman. Like, a little bit of stuff about that, but it's never really taught in school. You go
Yeah.
from Egypt to Greece to Rome, then you stay in Europe basically for the rest of your life until World War II. But and I really thought I found that your book was extremely informative. And so when you were thinking about writing your book, what was your intent behind it? Like, what was your end goal?
To be honest, a large part of it was just I'm interested in this and I think it's interesting and I'd like to share that with other people. But there was definitely a wider end goal that I thought I really think we should be talking more about these things and thinking more about these things. And maybe my part that I'm able to play in this right now, while I was writing it and drawing it, is just trying to share my interest with others, trying to
Mm.
get as much understanding as I could. Given the conditions, I tried to engage with some people online. I was in communication with different people when I wasn't sure about something. I'd write to someone who might know more. Um, the historian Didier Gondola, he wrote the preface to the book. He was a big help at the end. He sort of checked through it and told me if there were any like inaccuracies I needed to change. But yeah, I guess it was just sort of why don't we talk more about this? Why don't we hear more about this? Especially when that history, if we're talking about North America, about Europe, that history has been so linked with our own. And really, the reason why we're not talking about it, a large part of that is because we've, like I say, Western people have done a lot of wrongdoings in that area. Some of them very sort of obvious and visible, like colonialism, but also post-colonialism, like the meddling that went on after those countries gained independence, which is a lot less visible. You know, if you Google United States and Congo relations, you have to dig quite deep before you find out how much they were involved in the politics of Congo from 1960 until the present day. A bit
And,
less the last couple of decades.
and I think one interesting thing is as once again reading your graphic novel, which taught me a lot about the history. I don't know if many people realize how instrumental that era is to our lives right now. You mentioned uranium, which was during World War II. I believe it was coltan is called. Is how you pronounce it? The
Yeah, yeah,
for that's used in the Apple in the iPhones and things of that nature. Coltan.
yeah,
Gold we find there. Copper was big there for a while as well. It basically almost everything that is in our daily lives here we reaped out or stole out of, well, not stole, but took very out of the Congo. And a place that is so directly involved where our modern life is, you would think you should kind of know the impact.
yeah, absolutely. Like since European colonization arrived in the Congo in the late 19th century, there's been a series of materials that have been in high demand on the global market, which have been, depending on the moment, what it was, have been extracted there almost entirely with very little payment in return for the workers, or no payment often, and all basically always at a really high cost to the quality of life in that country. First it was ivory, which was a luxury good, but then after that it was rubber when the pneumatic tire was invented. Then it was copper in the early 20th century when electronics started being more popular and industrialized warfare happened. Then it would be uranium, and more recently it's coltan, which is inside all phones, all computers. Um, and while all of this has gone on, that's triggered, loads of different wars. It's in the 19th century, it triggered slave labor. In the mid 20th century, it was what kept Mobutu's dictatorship in power. It basically caused the coltan thing, caused the Congo Wars, which was the war with the highest death toll since second highest death toll since World War II. No, the highest since World War II. So the second highest death toll in that period. And that was essentially maybe not caused, but massively exasperated by the global demand for the material coltan when devices like laptops, mobile phones, also games consoles really exploded on the international market in the early 2000s. And all of the militias involved in that war, they were extracting those materials paying for their war with those materials, but also profiting on them. So it gave them a way to continue the war, and it also gave them a reason to continue the war. And all of that's gone on. We're mostly unaware of that. If you think about the Second Congo War happened at the same time as like the War on Terror began. If you think about how much the War on Terror was on TV screens in the media in the West, it was totally unavoidable. You know, it was everywhere. At the same time, the Second Congo War was going on. That was really linked to what was going on the international market with the explosion of those technologies. The death toll of the Second Congo War was way higher than the War on Terror, but it was kind of almost, it was like a footnote war in the international press until much later. Now people are starting to talk about it a bit more. And while all of that's gone on, Congolese people have really been fighting to try and stop that, and no one's been paying any attention. During the various oppressive regimes that they've lived under, first colonialism and then dictatorship, and now there's sort of like there is a democracy, but a lot of the recent elections, at least the elections since the year 2000, have been debated. While all of those things have been going on, there have been numerous uprisings, there have been numerous attempts, both by force and through democracy and through peaceful demonstration to sort of change those circumstances, attempts by the common people to improve their own lives. And that's just all been ignored, the same as all of it was ignored. So I just think it's sort of time we started paying attention to all of that stuff a bit better. And I think when I started reading about this topic and thinking about it, I was kind of just, okay, this is my own interest right now. I've got some friends who are interested in similar stuff. I didn't really realize what a global moment this is for that change in thinking. And a few months in, that was when George Floyd was killed and the Black Lives Matter movement exploded across the world. And obviously, as part of that, there was a huge part of that people were starting to re-examine. I know in the United States, it was a big re-examination of slavery. I don't know to what extent this happened in the United States, but in Europe, there was a huge re-examination of colonial history. In the United Kingdom, in Bristol, they pulled down the statue of Edward Colston, who was a slave trader who built a lot of the city. And people kind of said, okay, now we know who this guy is. We're going to get rid of him. And all of those things happened. And I thought, it's not just me alone in my bedroom who's thinking we need to start paying more attention to what's going on around the rest of the world. But actually, it's people all over the world thinking that at the moment. And maybe this is a really good time for this book and for books like this.
Mm. Now, one interesting thing is, once again, the book is a graphic novel. So it's very well researched, a lot of history inside it. And obviously, as anything, the Congo, like all places, have a very long, deep, complex history. So when you're conducting your research and deciding what's in the graphic novel, how did you decide which parts to leave in, to put into the work, which parts to leave out of the work for space or time or whatever? And how aware were you of the impact of what is either being put in or kept out?
It was really hard. I think that was the hardest part of the creation process because I wanted it to be brief and sort of easy to digest for a beginner. But I also wanted to give a general overview of everything, and not only a history of, here were the leaders and these were the wars, but also a history that contained elements about the daily lives of regular people, about cultural development as well, music, arts. I wanted to give like a full spectrum. So I had to cut out loads of stuff, to be honest. Like there's a lot of places where, things had to be really like cut down heavily at the cost of putting more attention on, some topics that probably wouldn't be included in most history books. I tried to, for example, in the 1990s, there was a sort of in the Congo, they had a similar art movement to what we had in the West in the 80s and 90s of the underground comic zine production, like people photocopying comics and selling them on the markets and things like that. So there's a little bit in there about that, which I think is really important. I think comics readers would find that really interesting. That obviously wouldn't get into most history books. So that sort of information had to come at the cost of more finer detail about some other things. It was really hard. And you've got a huge responsibility in your hands when you're telling a story like this, because people are going to read this and build their understanding of history from it.
Mm.
The way I try to remedy that is that at the back of the book, there's a large section of further reading, and there's another sort of a second postscript, which is information about where I got my visual sources from. So if people are looking at a particular illustration, they can see on what did I base that, how much of that came from my imagination, how much of that can we take as reality. Because I thought, in some of those cases, the first chapter's on prehistory. So you're drawing things that like we have archaeological remains of, but we have no real idea of how it looked. Obviously, most coming from your imagination. There are some parts of the history where, I'm just drawing straight from a photo, and maybe I'm reframing things a little bit, but everything kind of lies within that spectrum. And I really wanted readers to be able to look to this postscript and see how much can I take what I'm looking at as reality, and how much can I take it as an artist's interpretation of reality. So that was a way I tried to deal with something like that. And the further reading section, the same, like, if you're interested in this chapter, here's a bunch of other stuff you can read to find out more about it. I mean, there's already so much written on this topic. I think what I tried to do was just compile it into a really bite-sized chunk and put a bunch of pretty pictures with that chunk.
Well, in the foreword, there's a question by historian Natalie Zaman. Am I saying it right? Zaman David. I might be saying it wrong. That states, do professional historians own history? So in conducting your research, how did you determine the accuracy of the information you were drawing from? And how did you filter out the biases of the individual writer?
It's really hard. Sometimes you've just got to say, okay, that's what we're going with, but definitely consider who your source is or what your source is. And whenever you can, take many sources. And if you think you can't trust the source and you can't find another one, maybe just don't use it. So there were some cases where, for example, I'm drawing it, so I have to use a lot of visual information. Before photography, most of the visual information that there is, apart from artifacts that remain, most of the visual information is illustrations done by early colonialists, Belgian and other international people who went there to extract material gain at the cost of human well-being. You can't really trust those drawings. But a lot of people were there and they wrote about what they saw. There's also a lot of like the tradition of oral history wasn't really big at that point in the late 19th and early 20th century, but later on it got more popular. So there is people like Jan van Sina is a historian who worked a lot in the Congo doing oral history. So he'll interview people from a region. Some of them will be old, or maybe they have recollections from a previous generation. I think you can trust something like that more because it's coming straight from the people themselves. But at some point, if you're drawing stuff, you do just kind of have to throw a guess in there, or you just have to trust something. There's a scene in the first chapter of the book about when the Portuguese quote unquote explorers, they were essentially slave traders or explorers looking for more slave trading options, arrived in what was called the Kingdom of Congo in the late 15th century. That was a pre-colonial civilization. The name Congo was later given based on the river. I mean, it was named after them, but they were the original Congo. The national borders wasn't actually the same as modern day Congo, but it was included in that area. It also extended into Angola and some other places. So the records of the Portuguese meeting with the Kingdom of Congo, all of the records we have are from the Portuguese. The Kingdom of Congo didn't have writing. They did have quite a complex society, but they didn't have writing. And we don't have any illustrated records from them. So you really, I mean, you've got these illustrations from these early slave traders. Probably these illustrations were done by a guy in Portugal when they got back to Portugal and told him what they'd seen. So you really can't trust that illustration. There is an illustration of the King of Congo from that meeting, and I didn't really work from it because I just thought, I really don't think that an illustrator in Portugal who was told this by a slave trader has any chance of depicting things with accuracy. But I tried to use things like the Kingdom of Congo are known that cloth was a status symbol in their society, and there were many of their woven cloths that still survive. So I tried to surround. The scene that I've illustrated is the Portuguese explorer meeting the King of Congo on the first arrival. So I surrounded him with these cloths, I knew that they hung cloths in their houses because that's a practice that continued later on into history when we start having more sources. So I had this kind of cloths around him. They were blacksmithing people. They were very proud of their blacksmithing skills, and a lot of their bracelets and things like that do survive. So I thought, okay, the royal family would have a lot of things. They would have, copper or bronze or iron bracelets around them. So I tried to use as many sources as I could, which I could trust. But as I said, the further you go back in history, if you're drawing things, you start needing to guess things a lot more. And that's why that information on visual sources, I think it's sort of a guide on how much of a pinch of salt readers need to take the drawings with, if you get what I mean.
Yeah. And I mean, one other thing, once again, having this graphic novel, which for a lot of people could be their one source of historical data in the Congolese history, how do you view your position as the emissary of that Congolese history to the West?
What do you mean exactly?
Basically, for a lot of us, we're gonna get our history from your graphic novel. So in many ways, you are the deliverer of that history to us. So how do you view that responsibility as being the one who is, like I said, the conveyor of our knowledge, or a lot of our knowledge of that region?
I had to do my best. I would hope that I won't be the only conveyor of that knowledge, because I think I'm definitely not qualified. But one of my main hopes with this book is to direct people to other conveyors of knowledge as well. I mean, as we've just said, you never really get the full picture from one source. So I would really hope if readers, check this book out and enjoy it, they'd check out some of the other sources to try and get a more of a full picture. I think it's definitely too much responsibility for me. I think it's too much responsibility for any one writer. You only really get a view on things when you see it from a few different angles. In my introduction to the book and in the postscript, I've encouraged anyone who's interested in this topic to check out some other books. I would particularly recommend, I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, Georges Nzongola Ntalaya's book, The Congo, from Leopold to Kabila. That's a really good book by a Congolese historian who works in the United States, so it's written in English language. And that's a really good book to give a general overview of the history. But there's loads of stuff out there. It's too much responsibility for one person, definitely. I just had to do my best.
Well, I think he did an incredible job. And one thing I couldn't help but thinking about when reading the book, there's a lot of strife in the area that's been going on for decades. A lot of that had to do with the due to interference of countries like Belgium, eventually the United States, Portugal, some other ones as well. So if you had to voice your opinion on the subject, what should the West do? Should we try to fix the damage we cause, or we should just keep out completely? Because the more we interfere, the more damage we'll be doing.
I mean, it's easy for me to give answers because I would not be the person doing much of this. I mean, like on an individual level, I've made this book, but like answers I would give were, for example, reparations. That's a big topic right now. Belgium has not given any reparations to Congo for what they've done there. Neither have, like I said, the United States influence is a bit more unclear because it was kind of a Cold War behind the scenes thing. But Belgium hasn't given any reparations. That's a great place to start. Cancelling of the debts from the IMF and the World Bank. The IMF and the World Bank basically kept Mobutu, that was the military dictator of Congo from 1965 until 1997, a horrible leader, a violent leader. He embezzled so much money from the country and let it crumble around him. And he did that all under total support from the United States. They basically kept him in power. United States, Belgium, and France kept him in power because of his position during the Cold War. He was an ally, basically. And they kept him in power by authorizing a lot of loans from the IMF and the World Bank, which the United States had a big influence over. People knew that those loans were going straight into Mobutu's bank account. People knew that those loans weren't going on the infrastructure of the country. There was a report in 1982 when an IMF banker who'd worked for the last few years in Congo trying to sort of direct the restabilization programs with the money they were giving, and he put out a report in 1982 clearly explaining that you'll never restabilize this country's economy while that leader is in power. they kept giving the money for like 8 more years. So that debt could be cancelled. For example, like they're still expected to pay that now, and that debt was knowingly given to a kleptocratic leader. Other things that could be done from the entire international community: quit meddling with Congo's affairs for your own profit. I mean, these are all really big answers, and those are not things that we can do that much on an individual level. We can protest for it and we can speak out for it. On a more individual level, I think what all of us can do is just try and pay more attention to what's going on there, try and understand it more, try and communicate more with it, and try and, and I say this for Congo, but I'd say this for like anywhere in the world, try and take each other more seriously and treat each other with more respect. And that was definitely one of my hopes with this book, is that I think when you understand where people are coming from, you can't help but respect them and understand them. I know a rough history of the United States. So when I talk to you, I kind of get, I know nothing about you personally, but I kind of get where you and your ancestors have come from. If we don't know that about people, it's very hard for us to understand them and respect them and understand where they are in the world right now.
So would you say that our ignorance, or let's say obliviousness to the impact and damage that's been done from the West to the Congo, is that due to our ignorance of the country and the history? And is that ignorance intentional, or I don't want to say accidental, but you kind of get what I'm going with that?
I get where you're going. I think it's really hard to know. It's definitely intentional on a pretty big degree. I mean, if we're talking about like school education, and Belgian schools only started teaching this part of their history in the last couple of years. I don't remember which year exactly it was. It was only a couple of years ago. Formal apologies also have only come recently. And that's not only true of Belgium. I grew up in the UK. We didn't hear anything about the British Empire in the school, like nothing. We talked a lot about World War II, obviously, because we were kind of the good guys, quote unquote. But like, no one told us anything. You're aware that this thing happened. We don't know what the details are. So there's definitely a huge element to which it's intentional. But for sort of regular people living their lives, I think it's also very unintentional because they've just never been told about these issues, if you know what I mean. So it doesn't come into their frame of awareness, especially people from previous generations. Like people from my parents' generation, they were still born when the British Empire was, existing. They lived through its deconstruction, but that propaganda of, the strong imperial nation would have been really big when they were young. So it's also, I think, for people of that generation especially, it's maybe more accidental that they're just less interested in it because they were raised in a world in which less importance. I don't think it's forgivable. I think we all need to take responsibility to pay more attention. But I think it's a bit of both. It's a bit intentional, it's a bit accidental as well. I think what's nice is now we're starting to see these things, come to life a lot more.
Why do you think we, as a whole, are hesitant to learn about things and points in history where we're not technically, we would call ourselves the heroes of that moment?
Whoa, that's a really good question. I think it raises a lot of difficult questions, partially about identity, and about responsibility. And it's, I think people like to look back on the proud moments of the history of what they consider as their own identity or their culture. If you're going to be proud about something that, if I'm going to be proud about Britain's role in World War II, well, that means I have to be ashamed about Britain's role in the empire. If I take a different view that, I was born way later than that, I can't really claim pride or shame on any of it. I can have an opinion on how things were, then maybe I can be a bit more detached. But I think people like to have that sense of cultural identity. And I understand it. I mean, I think it's quite a natural thing to have a sense of cultural identity. People don't like to feel ashamed, and people don't like to have to confront these things. And I think there's also an element, there is that sort of that quote that gets bounced around a lot on the internet at the moment in memes of, I'm probably going to misquote it now, but something along the lines of, if you're used to a position of inequality, if you're used to being on the top of an unequal position, then equality feels like repression for you. And basically, you know, for like white Europeans, white Westerners, coming to terms with history also means calling in a new age of equality. And that's difficult for a lot of those people because to them, it feels like repression. It feels like they're losing privileges they once had, which they are. But, you know, I guess the answer to that is maybe it's worth losing a few privileges to live in a more fair world.
So, in your opinion, is it more shameful to have something negative in your history, or is it more shameful to ignore what's going on because of it?
Definitely the second. I mean, we can't do anything about what happened in the history. Like I said, like I obviously I need to be aware of my modern day privilege of being a white British guy and everything that has led up to that in the history, why I have that privilege. But it was not me who went to India and did those things, you know, like it was not me who, I mean, I say India, it was like 2/3 of the world. It was not me who did those things personally. So I definitely need to be aware of my role in them and try and think about how I can, you know, take part in this world in a way which hopefully creates more equality and hopefully, you know, offer out that hand of equality to those who are in a worse position because of the history we both descend from. I don't know how much sense there is in feeling really shameful about a past which we ourselves didn't live through. If you understand what I mean, I think we need to be aware of it. I think we need to be aware of how it affects the modern day and be proactive in trying to break down modern day inequalities. I don't know how much shame of the past offends us, but I know that that is a really big debate and it's really complex, and I hope it offends people on the internet when I say that.
No, I don't think. Like I said, I think your book your graphic novel is fascinating. Postcards from the Congo. I think there's a lot of information that I did not know, and I think was worth knowing about. I didn't realize just how fundamental to modern society was the region in that area, and for what we got out of that territory. So, where can our listeners find Postcards from the Congo?
So listeners in North America can get it in a bunch of places. It's out right now. You can get it from the publisher's website, Arsenal Pulp Press. You can get it on a lot of online sources. You can get it on Amazon if you want to. I would advise not, just because we're all sort of digging on Amazon. I mean, like, you know, we all understand why not. The coolest thing you could do.
Oh, I think you froze. Oh,
that'd be me and best for them.
Oh, I'm gonna stop you for a second, sir. You froze for like 15 seconds.
Okay.
So if you can, the last part I remember you mentioned the Amazon. You said Amazon, and then you stopped after that.
Yeah. So as I was saying, it is available on Amazon. I think it would be nicer if people didn't buy it on Amazon because they already have enough money. I think the best thing you could do is go to an independent bookshop that you like in your local area and ask them for it. That'll be good for that bookshop, and it'll be good for me because they'll see that this book is in demand and they might order a few extra copies. For anyone who's listening from, for example, from Europe, the book is about to come out in the UK next month, but you can already pre-order a copy. I know that Blackwell's website has got it. I'm not sure exactly which others. And in the rest of the world, I'm not exactly sure because I haven't looked myself. But if you just search online, if you go to the Arsenal Pulp Press website, you can definitely find out.
Well, Mr. Trueman, it's been an honor to speak with you, sir. Thank you so much. And I hope our listeners pick up Postcards from the Congo. Like I said, it was a great graphic novel, and I want to thank you so much for doing it.
Wicked. Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed this discussion. You had some really meaty, interesting questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, sir. Have a fantastic night.
Wicked. You too.
Special shout out to a brilliant online conference featuring Edmund Trueman called Comic Ethnographies, Graphic Narratives and Social Justice Research on YouTube. Make sure to check it out.